Dr. Arthur C. Clarke has, of recent times, been known as Sir Arthur C. Clarke. But within the confines of this room, and also amongst quite a bit of the community in Sri Lanka, he has gone beyond that. I would reckon the kind of attention that he received today would allow us to call him King Arthur. And Excalibur will probably be that fertile pen of his, but now transformed into a keyboard. We expect to hear from him now in what has been termed the keynote address, and we allow him to remain where he is and use the microphone placed there.
Well, I hope you can all hear me. I'm afraid I have considerable difficulty in speaking, but I'll do my best. It'll be a rather short key for this keynote address. Well, I do appreciate the nice things you said about me. I am delighted to see so many people at this meeting. It does show a real interest in astronomy, and in particular in planetaria. I suppose it's the correct plural, isn't it? I think the planetarium is one of the most wonderful teaching and inspirational machines ever invented. And sadly, it's the only way that most people will ever see the skies, as smog, light pollution, and other disasters spread across the face of the planet. In fact, it would be interesting to do a survey to find out how many New Yorkers had ever seen the stars. Well, this is the golden age of astronomy in many ways. So much is happening now. I'm sometimes asked if I'm sorry that the things we predicted in 2001 haven't all happened. There's no moon base, there's no manned flights to Mars or Jupiter or whatever. It's hard to realize that when Stanley and I started working on that movie in 1964, there were serious plans to put humans on Mars in the 1980s. Well, that didn't happen, but it will happen one day. Maybe not for 20 years, but meanwhile, I am by no means disappointed because so much has happened that I never dreamed I would see in my lifetime. Close-ups of all the major planets except Pluto, close-ups from the surface of Mars, showing every pebble in that area around the Pathfinder. And incidentally, I was delighted to get the book, Managing Martians, from the lady who ran that program, thanking me for turning her on to Mars when she was a little girl. That makes me feel rather old, but at the same time, I'm very flattered. I'm leaving with you an interesting article just came about the next project to land on a more sophisticated explorer on Mars, which is, I'm also leaving with you something quite remarkable that came in from Jet Propulsion Lab, some close-ups of the surface of Eros, one of the largest of the asteroids. And it's quite remarkable because it shows what looks like a dried-up pond. Well, how a dried-up pond could have happened on a world too small to have any atmosphere whatsoever, I can't imagine. So I'll leave those with you. Let me just do a survey. How many of you have seen 2001? Hold up your hands. Yes, well, I imagine most of but unfortunately, of course, the local people have had few opportunities of doing so. Incidentally, today there's a special screening in Mayfair in London. I don't know what that's in aid of. And this will amuse you. The European premiere, it'll be released in Europe generally sometime, but there was a pre-release arranged in the Vatican because, to my considerable surprise, if not embarrassment, I find that my Catholic friends regard that it's the #1 religious movie. And this is My views on religion are fairly well known. When I was privileged to speak in the Vatican a few years ago, I met George Coyne, the Vatican astronomer, who many of you I'm sure know. He spends a lot of his time in Arizona juggling rather large pieces of glass. Anyway, when I met him in the Vatican, I said, when I was invited to speak here, my first choice of title was, after Giordano Bruno, who? I imagine many of you know what happened to that unfortunate gentleman. Well, anyway, and George's prompt reply was, if you had used that title, the answer would have been you. So that was the beginning of a beautiful friendship. And, anyway, this is an exciting age, and of course there's going to be a little too much excitement in the next 2 days. As you all know, Mir is about to descend upon somebody, hopefully well out at sea, off New Zealand. Buzz Aldrin, who was here a couple of weeks ago, and much enjoyed meeting him again, he and Lois plan to be flying in that general area to watch the fireworks, which should be spectacular. And I bet a lot of space people in Russia and America and elsewhere are doing sums very rapidly right now, seeing what is happening up there. But let's hope it doesn't end on any. I'll end by, I just received a cutting from an Indian paper. Stephen Hawking, with whom I now feel quite a kinship, recently spoke in New Delhi. Incidentally, I spent 3 hours with Stephen and Carl Sagan a few years ago, doing a TV program together, which has never been aired. I got it. It's called God, the Universe, and Everything Else, which I think you'll agree is a rather comprehensive title. Anyway, Stephen was speaking in New Delhi, huge crowds. Of course, as you know, he can only speak through a computer-generated voice synthesizer. And I'm rather amused to see that some people claim that he'd endorsed astrology. What he actually had said, apparently, was that it was better than string theory. The ideas of string theory, for those of you who don't know, is a very esoteric branch of mathematical physics which explains the universe in terms of vibrating strings. I hope that one of the fallouts of this meeting and this week is that you'll do something to educate the local public in the distinction between astrology and astronomy, which is very much blurred in these areas. Whenever I'm asked for my views on astrology, I say, I think it's utter nonsense, but then I'm a Sagittarius and we're very skeptical. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joanne Young, and I am the director of the Sir Arthur C. Clarke webcast, which is the pilot of a science webcast series to teach the universe and all of its sciences in the 21st century. The reason that we're starting with Sir Arthur C. Clarke is because he is the visionary that made global communication possible. And so I'm very honored to be able to ask you questions from students and science centers from around the world, Sir Arthur. To begin, I have a question from a visitor to the Carl Zeiss Planetarium in Jena, Germany. And he asked, will mankind ever colonize space?
Well, of course, you can never predict the future. There may, and I'm always saying that I don't attempt to predict it, I extrapolate, I map possible futures, many of which I hope won't happen. In fact, by mentioning them, I hope I can do something to stop them happening. In fact, I'm always quoting my friend Ray Bradbury. I don't try to describe the future, I try to prevent it. Well, if our civilization does survive its infancy, and a glance at the morning papers does rather discourage one in that respect, we will certainly go on to set up scientific bases, and I think ultimately self-sustaining colonies. Well, that's the politically incorrect word nowadays. On the major planets of this solar system, and then build artificial space. After all, there's some rather large artificial structures in space, including the one that's falling down right now. But those are just the beginning. I'm sure we will colonize space and then go on across the interstellar gulfs. There's no reason I can set any limit eventually to what we might do. Although the universe is big, there's an awful lot of time. We may eventually explore this whole galaxy. It takes us a few million years to do it. By that time, of course, we won't be recognizably human. In fact, there's a general feeling that after 2020, the computers will have taken over anyway. And of course, they're much better adapted for space than we are. So they may just take some of us along for the ride.
And from Ben Burris, from the Chabot Space and Science Center in Oakland, California, what do you think would be the strongest single reason for sending humans to other star systems?
Well, I can think of a number of humans I'd like to send to other star systems. But, well, I mean, the urge to explore and discover is fundamental. If we hadn't got that from the beginning, we wouldn't be here now. We originated somewhere in the middle of Africa or wherever it was, and if we'd stayed there, we'd have become extinct by now. In fact, one of the best reasons for going out into space is because we have too many eggs in one fragile basket. We've recently discovered that we live in a very dangerous neighborhood. This planet is continually bombarded by fragments of comets, asteroids. This has only just been realized that history has been changed many times by this. In fact, if a rather large one hadn't hit the Earth 65 million years ago, we'd be a bunch of dinosaurs talking to each other. And they might have made a much better job of it, too. So this is going to happen again. So one of the reasons for going into space, to finding out what is there, is simply for our own protection. In fact, one of the last things that the late Carl Sagan said, that any civilization that does not become a spacefaring one dies.
From Martin Radcliffe of Exploration Place in Wichita, Kansas, as a young man, you went to university to study physics and had a strong interest in the British Interplanetary Society and the British Astronomical Association. Given your life over again, but starting in 2001, what would you, as a young man, be interested in studying, and what societies would you recommend to a student today?
Well, I was not a very young man when I went to university. I was in my mid-30s because I'd been to the Air Force and indeed the British Civil Service, from which I defected to go into university. Don't tell anybody, but I'm an ex-auditor. Good heavens, if I'd stayed there, I might have been Chancellor of the Exchequer by now. Heaven forbid. But, I mean, you must do what interests you. I was interested in space travel, certainly as a very young man. I read the first old pulp science fiction magazines, astounding stories, wonder stories, and they triggered my imagination back in the 1930s. And then I met my fellow crackpots in the British Interplanetary Society. We went around telling everybody one day we would fly into space, and the newspapers all made fun of us. I mean, how can you go into space? How can a rocket take you there? A rocket, no, it's nothing to push against. A rocket obviously can't work in a vacuum. That was the sort of criticism we used to have. I remember another one. They discovered that the ionosphere, which we rely on to reflect our short waves around the world, is at a temperature of, let's say, 1,000 degrees. So they said, and that's the average velocity of the atoms up there. So someone said, oh, we are prisoners of fire. We can never escape from the Earth. They didn't realize the difference between heat and temperature. You would freeze to death rather rapidly in the ionosphere, even though the odd atom was moving at a speed equivalent to 1,000 degrees or so. Anyway, I think we've won that battle in the long run.
Yes. Well, I have a lot more questions for you, but I'm going to save them.
No,
You're ready.
If you can take it.
Yes, I can take it.
I'm sorry if I'm a little long-winded.
It's all right. It's good. With the coming of space age in the 1960s and 70s, there was a great emphasis on science education. Science centers and planetariums were built in record numbers around the world, and school systems spent record amounts to improve science education. Yet, in the year 2001, there appears to be less science literacy and more popular mythology than before our entering the space age. As a writer and futurist, can you tell us what you think about science centers, planetariums, and school systems, what they should do to reach that world painted by you in 2001: A Space Odyssey?
I agree that there has been a deterioration of educational standards in many countries, and people are always saying this is a terrible thing. We've got to do something about our educational systems. Perhaps the first thing they should do is to pay teachers living wages. There's no better investment than education, and I hope that people wake up to that. I'm quite appalled by some of the things that are occasionally said by statesmen about scientific matters, global warming and lots of other things. Some of these issues are very complicated, but and I'm appalled by the rise of superstition, and I believe the majority of Americans don't believe in evolution, and in fact the fight's been going on. It's absolutely incredible, that people can be so stupid. But this is a battle which we have to win, and don't give up on it.
I have a question here from Teresa West, fourth grade unique learning experience class at Garfield Elementary School in South Dakota in the USA. And a child asked, what year will we use fusion for energy?
Well, perhaps accidentally you touched on a subject of considerable interest to me. Nuclear fusion is always 20 years in the future. It's been that way for the last 30 or 40 years. I don't think we'll ever have it. I think we'll find something much better. But that's a very controversial subject, which I've been personally involved in. My goodness, there's a Supreme Court judgment in Washington due today on this. I'm waiting for the results of that. Now, I think we're on the verge of discovering totally new energy sources. Some of them may be something weird like cold fission. Some of them may be fusion. Some may be tapping the energy of space. We now know that space is a sea of energy. In fact, the Nobel laureate Feynman once said that the volume of space in a coffee cup contained enough energy to boil all the oceans of the world. Well, no, if we can ever tap that, well, nuclear energy, anything else is just trivial in comparison. However, it's a pretty terrifying thought. And I've often wondered, this is not an original idea, how many supernovae are industrial accidents.
I have another question from Alan Dyer from the Calgary Science Center in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Has satellite communication been the revolution that you expected in educating the world, and in particular the so-called third world?
Yes, it certainly has, but it's had other effects which I didn't, which in some ways even more beneficial. It's shown the whole world what is happening everywhere. It's created a transparency, not just the satellites you know about, but in particular the reconnaissance satellites, which we're probably alive today thanks to the reconnaissance satellites which the United States and the Soviet Union, late Soviet Union, and other countries have got, which make it impossible for one country to steal a march on another. You can't move even a single vehicle around now without it being spotted by one of the many satellites up there, which can see objects down to about that size under favorable conditions. I'm not giving away anything top secret information. And you can buy, they're rather expensive, images from satellites commercially, which have about a meter or two resolution, which are adequate, of course, for many agricultural, other purposes. No, the impact of satellites isn't just communications, meteorology, earth resources, detecting pollution, all these things. So the revolution has occurred even more than I expected. What I didn't anticipate, and this is still remarkable, is the other revolution, the fiber optics revolution, which has taken much of the telephone traffic and even TV from the satellites and put it through glass hairs, which is an incredible technological revolution. But the two are complementary. The satellites can deal with moving, can survey the Earth, can get information to anyone anywhere else. Also, places that will never have fiber in islands and so forth. They also get round one of the problems. Fiber optics also gets around one of the problems of the satellites in the geostationary orbit, the time lag of about a second and a half, which is rather annoying. If you talk quickly, tell me. But they are there. You get mixed up because the echo comes back, and it's not with fiber optics. You have practically no such delay problem. So the two complement each other perfectly. Although I did say at one time we could get around the geosynchronous satellite delay problem. I said, Congress is very good at adding zeros to the budget. Why don't they add a couple of zeros to the velocity of light?
From a Minolta Planetarium in Osaka, Japan, what is the greatest astronomical discovery in the 20th century?
Ooh. That's a very good question. I suspect the fact that the universe, well, of course, remember that in the 20th century, which is quite a long time, at the beginning of it, we had no idea, what the universe, the cosmos was like. Or what anything was like. All our ideas of astronomy, in fact, have been revolutionized over and over again. In fact, most of the revolutions occurred in the last 10 or 20 years as well as the space age. So it's really hard to pinpoint any one thing, but I would say perhaps just the size and age of the universe. That is, it's a rather blanket description, but I can't think of anything more important than that. Let's have one more, and I think a lot of people here are probably dying of thirst.
Well, actually, we'll just end it right here. Thank you so much.
Okay.